Madam Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to wind up the debate on the report for adoption before this committee. Of course, that report is the report of the Joint Select Committee appointed to consider and report on the Cannabis Control Bill 2020. Madam Speaker, suffice it to say that there is agreement in this House today, and therefore the first order of business is to express my gratitude as the chairman of the committee for all of the contributions that came to this House, Madam Speaker. It is the work of two successive committees that brought us to the work product before us, Madam Speaker. And I am very concerned to lay on record gratitude for all of the committee members, which includes, Madam Speaker, those who served in the committee established to look at the 2019 bill as well. Madam Speaker, the benefits of the law, if this committee delivers the bill attached as the fourth schedule into law, and that is Appendix 4 that I refer to, the benefits of the law are to be factored right alongside the structure of law that operates with this. I want to remind you, Madam Speaker, that we are dealing with the Dangerous Drugs Act that articulates with this. I would like to remind that we are also dealing with the laws that treat with our medical practitioners. We're dealing with the laws that treat with our pharmacists. We're dealing with special economic zones in parts, as that becomes part and parcel of the law. And if you look at Appendix 4, Madam Speaker, and you look to Section 3, Clause 3, Subclause 4, there's a very important provision here. The provisions of the Dangerous Drugs Act, the Proceeds of Crime Act, the Medical Board Act, and the Pharmacy Board Act shall not prohibit or otherwise restrict or render unlawful the cultivation, processing, extraction, distribution, import, export, possession, or other handling of cannabis in accordance with the provisions of this Act. I want to remind, Madam Speaker, again in Clause 3 of the bill attached as Appendix 4, that the definition of handling in relation to cannabis includes the use, cultivation, processing, importation, exportation, transport, transit, transshipment, manufacture, sale, distribution, and possession of cannabis. The conducting of scientific research, testing, analytical services for the purposes of improving or developing cannabis, but does not include the use of medicinal cannabis by a person pursuant to a prescription or recommendation. Now, I've started there in Annex 4 in these provisions specifically to respond to the contributions coming opposite. With respect to the member for Maruga Tableland, the Honourable member said that she wished to speak. The Honourable member spoke to the cultivators of cannabis in her constituency. And I would like to remind the Honourable member that cultivation of cannabis is not permitted by law under any circumstances other than as provided in the Dangerous Drugs Act as amended in 2019, where one is permitted, each individual, to have 4 growing cannabis plants. Now, Madam Speaker, I say that because even though we take the step in producing this report and in delivering for recommendation before this House the Annex 4, which is the bill, the Cannabis Control Bill, I'd like to remind that we are obliged to obey the law. We are obliged to be conscious in our reflections that this is a progressive step. Now, permit me to explain that. Madam Speaker, it's a fact, a scientific fact. I get the extreme pleasure of having in 2019 delivered for the government the proposition that there would be a significant benefit in decriminalization and dangerous drugs amendments reflected on in this report. We have statistical evidence that there's been a 76% drop in caseload. We have statistical evidence coming from the Forensics Institute that there has been a massive decline in use of time to examine plant-like substance for cases in court, and instead that they can focus upon big areas. But Madam Speaker, the law that we bring about here is intended to work along with regulations. Now, if I can speak to the work of the committee in this report and answer my colleagues, we were very careful in the committee to make a strong distinction between medicinal, therapeutic use of cannabis, and that, Madam Speaker, is in clause 29 of the bill. The authority may issue the following licenses for medicinal, therapeutic, or scientific purposes, and there are 8 licenses. And then we have religious licenses. So there are 2 ways that you can use this. In answer to my colleagues opposite who are medical practitioners, the use of a recommendation versus a prescription was very purposefully thought of by the committee. The recommendation is for the psychological and other uses that are beyond medical categorization. A prescription is intended to treat with medical categorization. Madam Speaker, permit me to stop at this point and recognize that the work of this committee is not, as the Honourable Member for Moruga Tableland put it, a cut and paste of Barbados. No, Honourable Member, through you, Madam Speaker, this is the work of our committee, which factored amendments to the Dangerous Drugs Act, which factored the Cannabis Control Bill, and which factored expert advice that we received from the CARICOM. And the work of the committee in the report demonstrates that we were guided by expertise in Jamaica, in Canada, and, Madam Speaker, in Barbados. And I'd like to flag a few local experts. In particular, there is a gentleman by the name of Mr. Marcus Ramkisoon, someone who has been an advocate for the prescriptive detail of law when it comes to the cannabis industry. And I'd like to address recommendations coming from experts, including Mr. Ramkisoon, through you, as they feature in the recommendations of the report, to remind that we are moving towards a great detail of prescription, the fine detail of the law in the regulations which will be produced under the law, Madam Speaker. That treated what Pointe-a-Pierre had to say. The member for Pointe-a-Pierre made a very important point shared by all members of the committee. That is, in treating with the benefits against the risks, in particular to our children. And when we look at the risks to our children, Madam Speaker, I want to remind that the law is specific and clear, as Annex 4 demonstrates in the committee's report, that we protect children. There must be strict medical supervision. There must be strict prescriptive use by medical practitioners. In this law, Madam Speaker, that we propose in this report, we are asking that every aspect of the chain, of the link, from where the plant is grown, to how it is consumed, to who consumes it, to how it is destroyed, to the therapeutic use, to the patient information and confidentiality provisions, every step of the transaction is mapped out in the prescriptive form of the law proposed by this report, but it will be in much greater detail set out in the regulations that come via the authority which is to be established under this law. Those regulations, Madam Speaker, will ultimately come down to an explosion of care and caution versus economic opportunity. I want to compliment my colleague for Toco Sangre Grande, the Honourable Roger Monroe, in being a champion for rural community development, because it was my colleague who pointed out to me that the opportunity in rural communities in particular from an economic standpoint is tremendous. Now we know, Madam Speaker, from the arrests and convictions under the rubric of gathering and cultivation of cannabis, again reflected on in this report, that it is the people in our rural communities that have been court. They are often stranded in terms of geography. Their access to rural communities is difficult. As Minister of Rural Development and Local Government, that is my task, to deal with the 80% road network. But in the meanwhile, Madam Speaker, this bill offered by this report provides an economic opportunity that I've heard my colleague speak to. And therefore, I say through you respectfully that the work of this report demonstrates a tremendous economic opportunity. Because what do we have growing for us? What do we have going for us in Trinidad and Tobago? Relatively safe geopositioning outside the hurricane belt, tropical climate, one of the most aggressive intellectual property arenas in the world. Madam Speaker, you may not know this, but the Office of the Attorney General Intellectual Property Office took 5 out of 6 conventions into law in 1 year alone, Madam Speaker. And why was that an aggressive item in the Office of the Attorney General? Because geo-patenting of our DNA, of our type, of the genealogical positions of the genus of cannabis as defined in this bill, in this report, Madam Speaker, it means that we have the opportunity to present our cannabis as an origin indicator of worth, much like champagne is for sparkling wines, Madam Speaker. So for persons in rural communities, and I wish to compliment my colleague in particular for having drawn this to my attention, this is a tremendous opportunity. Now, Madam Speaker, member for Pointe-a-Pierre and a couple of others raised the issue of criminality and the concern about the banking industry, correspondent banking. The member for Pointe-a-Pierre raised that a while ago. It's a very good observation. It's why in the report you will see that the bill attached to the report starts off in the definition section of a specific position. The first defined term at clause 3 at page 31 of the report is AML CFT PF. What does that mean? Anti-money laundering, countering the financing of terrorism and proliferation financing. It also includes a reference to controller, and a controller in relation to a religious organization has the meaning assigned to it in section 3.1 of the Non-Profit Organizations Act. It also includes, Madam Speaker, the reference to subclause 4 of clause 3, which I pointed out, the Proceeds of Crime Act, and therefore this law is intended to specifically treat with the corresponding banking and banking issues to make sure that people who go into the industry of cannabis can be banked, that their money can be brought into the system, that the legality of the system can work. Because you cannot be a non-profit organization unless you are registered. You cannot be a non-profit organization unless your AML, CFT, PF forms are done. And law enforcement has access to those forms if you look at the non-profit organization. The Proceeds of Crime Act, law enforcement has access to every aspect of this train. Madam Speaker, when you get now to the other provisions which show why you can be banked, why there's no risk of correspondent banking failure, the law also provides for acknowledgement of what we call Recommendation 35 of the Financial Action Task Force. And that is to be found in Clause 65 and Clause 67 of the bill, where we specifically treat with the introduction of administrative fines. What are administrative fines? Administrative fines are an alternative to prescribed summary offenses, so that if you are given a notice that you are potentially guilty of a summary offense, that you have the option to pay an administrative fine. That finds itself in origin from Recommendation 35 of the Financial Action Task Force, Madam Speaker. So in answer to the member for Pointe-a-Pierre's concern about corresponding banking, about making sure that people who have an opportunity to make serious money in a serious industry, that they have the chance. Now permit me to address something as well. Madam Speaker, there has been expressed concern about our participation in international treaties. And I want to refer specifically to the International Narcotics Control Arena, brought about by international conventions, which we are in parties to, and part of which laws we have on our books. Remember, we're a dualistic society. Our laws are made, our international laws become local law when we make them local law, and until they're local law, the international treaty is just on the outside. So, Madam Speaker, I want to remind that that's where the Proceeds of Crime Act and the Dangerous Drugs Act came about. And Madam Speaker, it is important to recognize that what we are saying to Trinidad and Tobago after 2 joint select committees, after decriminalization on the 23rd of December 2019, Madam Speaker, many people in Trinidad and Tobago literally celebrated the proclamation of the Dangerous Drugs Act Amendment. And Madam Speaker, it gives me immense pride to participate in a government that had the courage to do that, Madam Speaker, because the benefit to the average human being in Trinidad and Tobago is tremendous. And Madam Speaker, as a member of Parliament for San Fernando West, my 11 HDC communities, my some 2,500 people who live in squatting conditions, Madam Speaker, I can testify, as many of my colleagues can, of the hardship of locking up people for 2 joints. And Madam Speaker, what we're proposing now for people who are inclined to agriculture, in this report, we are proposing an opportunity for economic profit, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, for the people of San Fernando West, who I speak for in this House, with the nameplate being not Faris Al-Rawi, not Minister of Rural Development and Local Government, but being member for San Fernando West, I would like to say for San Fernando West that my constituents all line up, as all of our constituents surely do, behind the economic opportunity that this bill offers. This report makes a recommendation that 30% of any entity going into the development of cannabis as an industry, that 30% of people who will get licenses, Madam Speaker, have to have local content. I'd like to remind, Madam Speaker, that is not a small number. And we ought not to be xenophobic and think that we can do it by ourselves. There is nothing wrong with big industry participating in Trinidad and Tobago, provided that we have local content factor. Now, what I found strange is that the member for Naparima didn't speak in this debate, because the member for Naparima, who is perhaps exploring acquiring another passport, perhaps in Guyana, is an advocate of the local content laws in some other jurisdictions. And when you look, Madam Speaker, at the local content in this law, I thought that the member for Naparima would have been jumping up and down to say, local content in Trinidad and Tobago law, look, the PNM government ensuring 30% of the companies in large enterprise in a country like ours, where we can grow agriculture indoors, outdoors, hard concrete, hydroponics, in the field, in rural community. I thought my friend from Naparima would certainly have been an advocate of that. But I guess it's only Barbados and only Le Pen and only Guyana that intrigues my colleague opposite. Perhaps that's why he didn't participate. So, Madam Speaker, local content anchored in this report, Madam Speaker, is a huge factor, because your committee, Madam Speaker, explored what happened in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Antigua and Barbuda, Jamaica, in Barbados, and we were very mindful, Madam Speaker, that we needed to preserve the local content. Minister Hines, as he sat then in the office of the Attorney General, the Minister of National Security, walked up and down Trinidad and Tobago with me in my capacity as then Attorney General, and participated in lively debate in demonstrating the public consultation for the work that this committee considered. And I wish to publicly commend my colleague, the Honourable Minister of National Security, for his dedication to this exercise, because, Madam Speaker, the people for Laventille West also stand behind this particular bill. also stand behind this report because they too want to have their opportunity for success. And Madam Speaker, what this committee's report demonstrates is money can grow on trees, and that money growing on trees has an economic potential which must be balanced against the risks to society. It's why the committee's report, Madam Speaker, focuses very clearly on criminalizing conduct that jeopardizes the most vulnerable. It's why the committee considered the report that caregivers have to be included in this, why parents have express liability in respect of their children, why in respect of the religious purposes that we can have in an absolute prohibition against the commercial activity in religious organizations. Because, Madam Speaker, if you're an adherent to the religious faith that may apply for a religious license under Clause 29 of the bill, as the report recommends, you have to make sure that it's under strict conditions. And the dispensary aspects, the control aspects, who receives, where those records are, all part of the subsidiary legislation, meaning the regulations to be produced under Clause 68 of the law, Madam Speaker, as it is proposed. So, Madam Speaker, on behalf of the people of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, I can certainly say that there is great excitement. Madam Speaker, there were many people along the way that had great doubts and fears about the propriety of a law such as this. Our Honourable Prime Minister, in acting in his capacity as the head of the cabinet, in considering our very diverse views, and Madam Speaker, I'd like to say this publicly, in our cabinet, there is no position other than robust intellectual debate. There is collective responsibility. But Madam Speaker, we are not people afraid to deal with issues. Sometimes issues can be tough. Sometimes there will be disagreement. But Madam Speaker, it is our Honourable Prime Minister who quite publicly put me in my place, at least on one occasion, in relation to this law in the early days, and for good reason, reminding that there had to be cabinet approval of policy, Madam Speaker. The cabinet approved policy led by our Honourable Prime Minister is that we need to take our heads out of the sand. We need to protect the most vulnerable. We need to ensure that there's a careful commercialization. We need to ensure that our children are protected. And I'd like to say to the Honourable Prime Minister, thank you for having the courage to support law such as this, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we are definitely, if I could put this forward for people who are listening, we are definitely going to see certain amendments to the law when the authority comes into effect. When the authority comes into effect, there will be further revisions on the law. We have left space for the authority to be created. The authority will then take best practices, develop the regulations under Section 68. Those regulations come for affirmative resolution in the Parliament. Those regulations will allow us to deal with any international concerns that may come our way. There will be tightening up of provisions. So I'm giving notice that the approach that the government has taken, which is to start. Madam Speaker, our friends opposite had their turn at the wheel on many occasions. The member for Siparia served in the NAR government. The member for Siparia served in a UNC government. The member for Siparia served as an Attorney General for a couple of months in this country. The member for Siparia served as Prime Minister. I'm talking about 15 years of operation, Madam Speaker. Is there a point of order?
Or the lead member for Siparia.
Madam Speaker, as I was saying in answer to the debate, the member for Siparia for 15 years had an opportunity to treat with laws such as this, but regrettably, there was no courage. Regrettably. And Madam Speaker, what I'm seeing in the context of this report signals hope for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. The member for Pointe-a-Pierre was right. Coming out of a COVID-19 pandemic and transferring ourselves now into an endemic stage, Madam Speaker, in climbing down from our reliance on oil and gas, Madam Speaker, we, the People's National Movement, as the government of this country, are proud to offer an opportunity to people in the cannabis industry because it is intended to be regulated in a very strict way. And Madam Speaker, to all young entrepreneurs out there, get ready, Madam Speaker. Get ready and set for a diversified economy, which includes cannabis as an option under strict regulation. Madam Speaker, I don't think that there's anything more to add to this particular motion to adopt this report, other than to say those careful words, I beg to move.
Honourable Member.